speaker this evening is David Brin. He's an astrophysicist and also an international best-selling author for such books as The Postman, Earth, and Existence, and Hugo Award winner, and Starlight Rising, and The Uplift War. So I'm going to ask Mr. Brin to please come up here and talk better than I can. That may be much better.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Stefan, and thank you. Thank you. I think the lavalier mic is working. Yeah. All right. That's amazing. Of course, some of the best humor in movies has been because of lavalier mics. How many of you remember the scene from The Naked Gun, where Leslie Nielsen finishes at a press conference, the press conference continues, but he goes to the men's room? Yes, there goes your male humor for you. I want to thank Jen and the committee of this Mensa RG, and I want to thank the letterers. That's acceptable.
Well,
Yeah.
sort of.
Yes, well, Simone and Richard, thank you very much for your hospitality. I should really try not to try to pun in the presence of the punster. So yeah, about 4 weeks ago, I gave a Mensa RG in Schaumburg next to Chicago. It's there from my parents' hometown. We were talking here about how my dad was a gangland, Tommy gun covering reporter for the City News Bureau back in the 1930s. Okay. But yeah, Chicago, that was fun. My topic there was about artificial intelligence, human augmentation, and all of it a little bit dry. So we won't go there. Besides which, I don't have my AI assistant here with me. The thing is, there's a lot of discussion about artificial intelligence, and the topic that I use to discuss where we fit in what's called the singularity. How many of you have heard of the singularity? And how many just didn't raise your hands? Because in this group, I think you mostly have heard of the notion that artificial intelligence is taking off. And it's still arguable whether or not it's actually going to achieve consciousness. But certainly its ability to emulate what we do is skyrocketing. Just a few years ago, this type of program called GPT-3 started winning at much more difficult things than what Watson, which is a completely different approach, achieved by by beating all the chess grandmasters, by defeating the Go grandmasters, which was much harder. And then started engaging in conversations that are much more human sounding, and writing verbiage that takes you several paragraphs to say, what? But the biggest news happened just a few months ago when they showed that a new form of GPT-3 called DAL-3 is now, you can go and describe something that you make up on the spot. A panda in roller skates on skating on top of bamboo on Jupiter. And within seconds, we'll show you a rendering of that scene with actual artistic aesthetics. Really amazing. Look it up. There's some videos about this. And of course, this is somewhat disturbing and enthralling. We may know about another form of intelligence before we meet aliens and before we do what some of my novels have been about, and that is the uplifting of our fellow creatures. Some of my science fiction is about dolphins in space, or chimpanzees and altering of. And during questions, you can ask about that, because that is a fantastically interesting topic. What would be our responsibilities as the first sapient race, other than our first responsibility, and that's try to be a little bit nicer to each other and save the world from our own selfishness. But the thing about AI is that we don't know where we get some of our abilities. We just don't know where they came from. My novel Existence has 5 very different from each other autistic characters. And I was graced with a blurb from Temple Grandin, so when that came, I didn't go, oh boy, I'm going to sell more books. It was, yes, nobody's going to give me any crap about my autistic character. And nobody has. The right blurb can really save you a lot of grief. But one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is, we have this image from movies like Rain Man and this recent TV series, Love on the Spectrum, that these difficulties come automatically with talents. Well, what we call savant traits really only exist in about 5% of people on the autistic spectrum, and are really very useful in a small fraction of those. And yet, one of the things I pointed out to the Australian Defence Department when I was talking to them a few weeks ago about human augmentation is that one of the frontiers is, what if we discover what gets switched when these savant traits occur? Because the temptation is to say it's zero sum. And you were wondering where I was rambling with all of this. But I'm zeroing in on you, because this is all sort of coming a little bit home, isn't it? I mean, how many in this room have wondered if the gifts that you received came with a zero-sum price? That there was a cost to the gifts that you have? I know that's been the case. I've wondered about that myself. It's something I've thought about for myself. For example, and maybe I'm smart and I paid for it by not being very likable. Don't doubt it. There are people on this planet who would applaud that remark.
We like you.
Give me time. As it happens, these savant traits aren't totally restricted, zero sum, to folks who are otherwise facing difficulties. They sometimes happen to neurotypicals, although usually after some kind of a trauma or injury has shaken things up, but not always at a great cost. There are known examples of people who have had something that shook them up cerebrally and remained good spouses, parents, good at their profession, likable, but suddenly, for instance, in one case, the guy absolutely could not survive if he weren't given 2 hours a day to practice the piano. Okay, well that's a cost, but he wound up at Carnegie Hall. It turned out you just tell any taxi driver and they'll take you there. Richard expected better from me.
Actually, I did.
Okay. No, I had personal experience with that. And that is from when I was a junior at Caltech. And that was a rough time. But there was 6 months in which I knew what time it was. I mean, talking about within seconds.
Wow.
I mean, you know, I just simply knew what time it was. And I would turn around or someplace. I mean, look, obviously a potential explanation is that I subconsciously saw a reflection of the clock. But even that's kind of impressive. But it went away after 6 months, and I never knew why it came or why it went. We live in an era in which we are just beginning to understand this stuff. And it's going to be our children's children who actually have an idea of what's going on and can navigate this territory. We are only slightly less confused than our parents. Well, when I think about my parents, I guess more than slightly. But in any event, these are some of the issues that we face. I mean, how are we different than the animals? I mean, we're told that, every year it seems that we find out that some species of animal is smarter than we thought it was. I mean, some of the books that made my career, you know, got me a nice house. Some of those books are about those we knew back in the 80s who were at borderline degrees of pre-sapience, I called it. And thus were grist for my series of novels about the process of uplift. And that is giving a hand to those who were stuck at a level of, shall we say, lower? Well, that's not politically correct. So how do we interpret it when every few years we find out, some ethologist has found out, that this or that species is smarter than we thought it was? Dolphins, chimps, bonobos, sure. Gorillas, sure. But now we know that baboons are smarter than we thought. Elephants. Oh my God, have you seen the one that paints? The sea lions, corvids, crows, ravens, parrots, and recently prairie dogs. Their barks actually seem to contain information about, you know, red-colored human, familiar, no threat. Thank you, I think. What lesson should we learn from this? The one I always hear is, this proves that we should be humble. It proves that humans aren't anything special. It proves the exact opposite. It proves that nature and Darwin welcome all, or a lot, to a certain level of sapience, and thus far you are welcome, and beyond this thou shalt not go. There is a glass ceiling of certain basic linguistic and tool-using abilities, and beyond that, nobody has crashed through that glass ceiling except turn your head and look at somebody who did, whose ancestors did. Not just crashed through it, exploded it to the point where, you know, we're here today, and you're a member of your club. It's not that we're not special. All this information is showing that we are really, really, oh, I'm sorry, Richard. really unique. He turned us, he shook his head and said, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. We're very unique.
Exaggeration is a billion times better than understatements.
What this does is it does put an onus on us, but not to think that we're not special, but to think that, this might be the galaxy's one chance. 65 million years ago, there were probably creatures that were as depicted by Steven Spielberg. The velociraptors, they had a brain ratio and apparent activities levels that were probably well depicted in Jurassic Park. In other words, at least as smart as any of those critters we've got today. It did not help them. They did not have a space program. You know what the world is going to be like 65 million years from now? Well, 65 million years from now, we're going to have only a few million years left, because it's about 100 million years that we have until the Goldilocks zone, the continuously habitable zone around our sun, migrates out so that its inner edge touches Earth's orbit. And from that point on, in order to avoid a greenhouse runaway, we would have to either have an atmosphere with too little carbon dioxide for plants to grow, or move the planet. And we might be capable of that. If you want to see how, look up my name and lift the Earth. I have a video. And we better get moving on it, because we only have 100 million years. But of course, the operational thing is, what if we do to ourselves, or nature does, what happened to the dinosaurs? Well, then the Earth would only have maybe one more chance. And in my novel Earth, I talk about various metaphorical and actual ways in which the planet herself might come alive. So, we are in an awkward situation. It does not appear that anybody helped us. This whole ancient aliens thing is insulting. It makes me angry. It's insulting to our ancestors who, it took UFOs to move stones and ship stones and fit stones together. If you were a member of the Inca or the Egyptian or the Rapa Nui, that's Easter Island civilizations, and you saw all the tragedy and the disasters, and your babies kept dying in your arms, and you thought that gods would come and help you if you only chipped and moved some stone, you would figure out how to chip and move stone. Our ancestors were ingenious, hardworking, and we need to have some empathy for them, because we're the product of all of their stupid mistakes and the few really important advances that they would make each generation. And we're standing here on their shoulders. I was giving a speech like this in China, and somebody said during question, well, the thing about science fiction is it implies that our descendants might be, better, in which case aren't we insulting our ancestors? It's not a question you don't really hear in the West, but it's really opened my eyes to an Eastern way of looking at things, because the respect and reverence for ancestors is important to them. Whereas, how many of you get respect from your kids? Wonderful offspring here. My wife is a little under the weather, so she sends her regards. And I answered that young man. I said, look, your perspective is sincere, and it has a great aesthetic behind it and a great culture behind it. But seriously, don't you think those ancestors would want you to stand on their shoulders? Don't you think they went through great efforts to make you better, richer, stronger, smarter than them? Don't you think you insult them when you say you're no better than them? You're saying that all of their efforts were for nothing. Don't you think you honor them by standing on their shoulders and reaching a little bit farther? Isn't it your goal to have your children stand on yours and to grab their ankles and never let go? Well, all right, so there's, we've developed some things over the last million years. If you take a look at the human brain, we have the cerebellum and medulla of fish. We have a basic mammalian cortex layered on top of that. We have a primate cortex layered on top of that. And then we have these prefrontal lobes, these nubs just above the eyes. And I like to think that there's a phrase in the Bible describing how Moses had lamps on his brow. And people wondered about that. What the heck does that mean? Well, I like to think of it as metaphor for the prefrontal lobes. And you can see them right there in the one of the greatest works of human art, which was Michelangelo's sculpture of Moses in Rome. And these are the lamps on our brow that let us engage in empathy, in imagining, what if I were that person? What could that person possibly be thinking? And sometimes that enables you to understand that alien sitting next to you, sitting across the table from you, arguing with you, possibly even canceling your vote, possibly even hating you. But these do more than that. They also let us do what Einstein called the Gedanken experiment, the thought experiment. Einstein, there were two things that made the theory of relativity. One was the math, and he left most of that to his wife. That was supposed to get at least a chuckle. Yeah. Although it had its validity. Then there was the Gedanken experiment, where he imagined himself on a streetcar leaving the clock tower in Brin, Switzerland, and watching the hands and watching all the people around and tracing the rays of light, only imagining that the streetcar was moving at 99% of the speed of light. And just by sitting there imagining the rays of light, he had a pencil and paper. But just doing that, he knew where the math had to go. So we do those thought experiments with these little nubs. And they're terribly important, which is why I'd rather have a free bottle in front of me than a prefrontal lobotomy. Okay. Not a approval. I am forgiven for my very unique remark earlier. These lamps on the brow are the seats of foresight, or Prometheus. So what I want to do at this point is read to you from, since Richard read the beginnings of some different openings, I'd like to read to you something from a story of mine that's in my best of collection. And thank you very much, Stan, for lending this to me for just a moment. You really know that you have less lifespan in front of you than behind you when they come up to you and say, let's do a best of. Okay, so this is from a story called The Tell, and it's related to Richard's real claim to fame as the greatest
Reader.
creator of poker players. You can read much of the human saga, a stark history of extravagant hopes and stunning defeats on the face of any gambler. The same story told by Judean hills, where towns and villages gradually piled atop one another, layer after layer, each stratum spelling yet another tale of confidence and ambition that inevitably failed, till someone else arrived to build upon the dust. An upward sedimentary process, mounting ever higher, generations separated by the babble of language and culture and centuries, but united by one aim, to reach heaven by dint of hard work, hope, and pain. Here we have trenched through an augury, our guide explained, while leading us along plank bridges that crisscrossed over Tel Ein Makor Dig. An important ceremonial center, it apparently remained in use across Hellenistic period until it was burned and abandoned under the Hasmoneans, then restored during the Roman era. She gestured toward a broad, shallow excavation where ancient ashes and debris had been removed slowly and painstakingly by archaeology students from all over the world. One cluster of young folks crouched at the north end, murmuring to each other alternately in English and Hebrew. So this story goes on to, you find out that the narrator is a stage magician in Vegas who also does poker and is consulted by renamed CIA because they suspect that people out there, certain forces, have figured out how to tell the future. And so it's the tell because he has consulted with them on a number of things, but one of the things he's got is he's one of those people who can read tells in his fortune-telling act and all of that. Okay, this is from a story that's similar in that it's biology. More of my stories are about biology than about physics. Like every person who ever contemplated existence, I've wondered if the world was made for me, whole and new, this very morning, along with counterfeit memories of what came before. Recollection is unreliable, as are the records we inherit every day. Even those we made the night before, our jotted notes or formal reports, our memorials carved deep in stone, even they might have been concocted along with memories of breakfast by some deity or demon, or by an adolescent 28th century sim builder, a pimpled devil playing God. Find the notion absurd? Was that response programmed into you? Come now, history was written by the victors, while losers passed their entire lives only to serve as brief speed bumps. And aren't all triumphs weathered by time? I sound dour, a grumpy grown-up. Well, so it goes, when tasked with cleaning messes left by others, left by my former self. And so, with a floating sigh of adulthood, I dive into a morass, records, electronic trails, and memories that float before me like ancient dreams, ruminations of an earlier, ignorant, not innocent me. It all started medically, you see, with good intentions, like so many sins. So the narrator is a woman who, she and her ex-husband are very elderly, cancer-ridden, and Nobel Prize winners. And they are trying to figure out what cancer is. And I got an email from somebody who said, dang, Brin, that speculation about cancer is the one thing you'll ever be remembered for. Oh, geez, I don't know if I want to read that one. It's a story about a couple of Russian girls who are dragged by their mother toward the Gulag. And I don't know that something with Russian characters would be perhaps nekulturny, as they say. How about this one? When the Martians came, they proved unlike anything we imagined. Elegant, dauntingly tall, and gleamingly enigmatic. They spilled out of a bizarre craft that appeared at dawn gently and quite suddenly on the ELV launch pad at Cape Canaveral. We called the thing a ship for lack of a better word. In fact, it more resembled an outcrop of ochre desert stone, a jumbled rock pile that had been yanked from some faraway canyon and somehow deposited in swampy Florida. Nobody would imagine that it flew, except that a dozen eyewitnesses swore they had seen it descend swiftly and almost silently at daybreak. For about an hour, it just stood there, creaking and settling next to the gleaming derrick where unmanned space probes sometimes get hurled upward atop pillars of flame. Pebbles and reddish dust, plus an occasional boulder, showered onto the concrete apron, covering scorch marks left by past firing launches. Despite all the grit, we could tell the newcomers were far beyond primitive rockets. Finally, from what appeared to be the mouths of several caves, creatures started emerging. At first sight, they seemed amorphous, hard to make out against the rocks in slanted dawn, slithering down slopes of glittering dust. But their forms changed before our eyes, adapting to this environment. They seemed to unfold as they descended, rapidly gathering themselves upon slender bipedal legs until several dozen spindly, multi-jointed humans finally stepped onto the concrete apron. Like newly emerged butterflies, all of them turned toward the sun for a few minutes, preening and stretching tall, revealing long torsos covered with translucent greenish skin that bulged in a pronounced hump across both shoulders. Soon each hump opened, spreading into a pair of diaphanous fans like parasols or wings that seemed to firm and gain shape under full daylight. The chief color is the same as chlorophyll, commented Slade, using a spectrometer she had ingeniously yanked from the Chang'e spacecraft moments after the aliens responded. Those wing-like appendages must be collectors. This is the story in which I get to kill some of my best friends because, let's say the aliens have a grudge and they're seeking individual humans, and I managed to put a bunch of my friends into scientists I respected and all that. That's one of it's called a Tuckerization. You give a place in your story to someone you respect or who did you a favor. And if they help me with some of the science in a story, then I murder them quite gruesomely. Or in a few cases, they hold out for live sex on stage. I've done that, but sometimes I don't publish the story. All right, let's see. Now, there's the one-time travel story I ever completed. Let's see this one. Oh, here's one. There's an opening line. It annoyed Io's best friend to give birth to a 4-kilo cylinder of tightly wound, medium-grade placental solvent filters. Yes, in this story, what they do is the biological fabrication is mostly done by fabricals, but the really high-quality piecework is done by women who rent out their wombs. I had a phase, my pregnancy phase of stories, and then it's his fault. So blame him if because I wrote them when he was being made, and I was terribly impressed with the process. So I decided I wrote wrote some stories. One of them is, let's see now, a husband comes home, finds out his wife is pregnant with a boy, and so insists she go to the clinic and have a teaching unit installed so he can have preschool. So she has a womb with a view, and the approval of a couple of dozen people on this planet is what I live for. You're not number one. However, number one does have a novel out. Some of you saw it on the bench out there. I think it's just absolutely brilliant, wonderful, very, very feminine and beautiful novel, kind of tear-jerking until the protagonist finally gets her act together and stages a revolution. But it has one of the best opening lines I ever heard, and I'm going to recite it from memory. It's from The Melody of Memory by Cheryl, well, in this case, she chose to use my last name, Cheryl Brin. Beautiful novel. I was 9 the year my words saved a man's life. It wasn't until later that my words killed him. That makes you want to read the rest of the page. Are any of you into theater? Yeah. The worst phrase, what's the worst phrase that you ever hear? What's the phrase that you most dread hearing? I have a screenplay. And I'm going to email you mine. Well, if you watch Ben's favorite movie, Arsenic and Old Lace, he's Cary Grant had inflicted on him by the cop he's hoping will just do his job and rescue him. I have a play. The opening musical background is Night on Bald Mountain. How many of you recognize where that's from? Who can say where you saw it? Fantasia, exactly. Curtain rise. Across a dark stage, we catch sounds of a medical emergency, muffled voices, medics fighting to save someone, the erratic flutter of a heartbeat monitor as a laser writes pulse beats across the ceiling, distracting the audience as actors move into position. The voice of an EMT tech off stage. We're losing him. Let's intubate and get ready to that adrenaline. Medical stock sounds start to fade away as the stage lights rise. We see the devil, Big D or BD, in a swivel chair, small horns on his brow, feet up on a lustrous desk in the grotto office. To the rear stretch a row of depressing-looking office cubicles with shadows moving sluggishly within. A backdrop gives a visual impression that the cubicles go on and on, depressingly almost forever. One human, Polo, enters on stage right, stumbling at first as the fading hospital voices shout, "Clear!" Polo quivers as an electric tremor zaps, then fades away. The hospital sounds vanish. Recovering a bit, Polo looks around the grotto, at first confused but curious. Startled, Polo stares at BD. Then as realization dawns on Polo, he nods, then wanders over to a trophy case and a wall of pictures. Polo, you can tell a lot about someone from their decorations or their hallucinations. BD, oh, how so? Polo, no pictures of Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, any of the big-time killers. What I do see are propagandists, Goebbels, Savonarola, cable news executives. You must be proud of those. BD answers with an accent that conveys olden times, perhaps a twang, but with aristocratic tones. BD, one keeps up with the times, so you know where you are, who I am. Who you're supposed to be? Sure, Lucifer, Satan, serpent, Iblis, Agi, the devil, Big D. I like that, Big D. You have or had a knack for words. Maybe away with words. Polo listens as the heart monitor sounds rise again briefly to audible. Had. So I'm toast? No chance they'll save me? Oh, there's a chance. It's why you're here. Won't you sit? No offense if I stand. Call it a gesture of self-control. Well, you're the one who mentioned illusion. I said hallucination. Is that what you think I am? There's more of gravy than the grave about you. Dickens, so I'm just a delirium, while an emergency room doctors fight to save you. A hyperactive mind, keeping busy to the last. Keeping busy through a crisis. Polo gestures the display case. Hence your trophies are what a guy like me would imagine on your wall. Never mind tyrants and slayers. They're all great fibbers, beloved of the father of lies. So you're sticking with that notion? I'm just an undigested bit of beef, the delusion of a dying man? Polo winces at dying man. I shouldn't have stepped off that curb, rushing in where my help wasn't even wanted. What did you say? Oh yeah, whether you're a delusion. Yeah, pretty much. Actually, it's kind of important that you at least consider what? That I might be real, that this all might be real. Why is that important? Because only then would this have legality. Please sit. BD uses his cane to push a thick binder with wax seals. A contract with the devil. Really? This cliche? Cliches tend to have a basis. Someone first said to be or not to be. Nah, Shakespeare heard it from a guy who heard it from Homer, who heard it from Tupac the caveman. Polo taps the contract. Why me? And it goes on from there. Now, I don't know what amount of time you had set aside for me to blather like this. This is something I almost never do. But because Richard did his opening lines thing, I thought, would that be fun? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up for you all for questions. And that way, if you have to go to the bathroom, you can go. And that way, if we might need to wind this up, I can start getting hints. That way, if you want to follow up on any of these things that I offered, it's not the most coordinated speech I've ever given. If you like, through my website, you can find one that I think is one of my most important TED Talk, and that is about the curse of our time, which is sanctimonious, self-righteous indignation. It is a bona fide drug high. They have checked. They know that it is a self-release of endorphins that is as powerful as heroin. And we're being torn apart by deliberate provocations of this pleasure response. People say stoking anger. Well, anger is a method by which you can do this. You can get into a cycle of sanctimonious. In fact, you can get into a cycle of How many of you have ever looked in a mirror during a self-righteous spit and had the honesty to say, oh, this feels so good. I am so right and they are so wrong. None of you are raising your hands. And the rest of you? So that's one of the things you could look up if you wanted to. Let's put it this way, there aren't many people on this world who make me seem shy. But I'm looking at you. Okay, so with that, let's open it up for questions. Yes?